All right, Chapter 2, Classical China. We'll be setting the stage, patterns in classical China, political institutions, religion and culture, economy and society, how Chinese civilization fits together. All right, a little prehistory here, kind of a little bit of what's occurring beforehand. The Shiite Dynasty, for a long time, used to be considered a mythical dynasty. Stories just kind of passed down, really wasn't a lot of truth to it. Well, now archaeologists have started to find evidence of this dynasty, so I thought it'd be worth mentioning. You don't have to worry about it for your AP exam or any test that we'll have in this class. Here are the borders of the Shiite Dynasty, of the Shang, and of the Zhou at its height. And here's the Qin Dynasty and the Zhou Dynasty with the border of present-day China. All right, the Qin Dynasty, 1530 to 1027 BC. As mentioned earlier, this is the River Valley civilization. We just need to kind of make sure you have the understanding of the foundation going into the classical time period. We mentioned before in comparisons with the Egyptian and the Chinese, they have writings, palaces, and tombs as well as a similarity. Early cities, Anyang, which is kind of in the middle here. And then your social classes are also set up during this time. You have the king and the emperor. You have your warriors, which eventually we also have with your aristocrats, the nobles. You'll have the peasants. And eventually what will come along will be your merchants. That will be at the very bottom of the peasants. And then your lowest will be the mean people. Family and society. This is going to be the center of society is family. Your ancestors, respecting your elders and your parents. This is a basis that keeps China unified throughout its time period and out its history. And that's why from dynasty to dynasty, even when outside invaders come in, China stays very unified, and those invaders adopt the Chinese have instead of making them go by what they are doing. Women had an inferior role, arranged marriages between 13 and 16 years old. And then the biggest part, respect for the emperor. That's the most important part. And we'll see how that works with transition from the Shang Dynasty to the Zhou Dynasty and so on with the Mandate of Heaven. Okay, our first classical dynasty for China will be the Zhou Dynasty, 1029 to 258 BCE. This is the later Zhou Dynasty to the ocean. The height was 700 BCE. It is the Middle Kingdom in the Yangtze River Valley. And the mandate of heaven will be established to justify overthrowing the Shang. And I'll show you a slide on that as well. Confucius, we're going to cover his philosophy a little bit as well. Here are the three main dynasties. This is the later Zhou coming up to during their warring state period when they've lost control. The red line area will be for the yellow area will be the Han. Okay, the Chinese believed in the yin and the yang. All right, everything has its counterpart, male, female. They believed life went in a cycle of events. The Mandate of Heaven is obviously part of that. The strong dynasty establishes peace and prosperity. It is considered to have the Mandate of Heaven. Now, this is important to understand. There wasn't this audible voice, you must be the ruler now. There wasn't a prophet saying, you are the next ruler. It was basically whoever ended the chaos, brought about prosperity, must have the blessings from the ancients, the elders, the gods, and therefore they have the Mandate of Heaven, and the emperor is the son of heaven. In time, the dynasty declines, it becomes corrupt, taxes are raised, and of course, power grows weak. Disasters such as floods, famines, peasant revolts, invasions occur. Old dynasty is seen as having lost the Mandate of Heaven. Rebellion is justified. That's important to understand because they do have respect for the emperor, but if the emperor has lost the Mandate of Heaven, he's no longer have to respect him, and therefore that justifies the rebellion. The dynasty is overthrown through rebellion and bloodshed. New dynasty emerges. New dynasty gains power, restores peace and order, and claims to have the Mandate of Heaven, and our cycle continues on this way, and we'll continue to see that throughout the history of the Chinese civilization. Invaders from the north will cause some disruptions, as well as your feudal lords gaining more control. The Zhou Dynasty, this was the feudal period, so you have lords and nobles over areas. They're having their private armies, and they're fighting for power more and more and more, and the emperor is losing power. And so these are the areas of dividing up the regional kingdoms that were having the warring states, period. Your next dynasty will be the Qin Dynasty with Qin Shi Huangdi, which means first emperor, and this is also where you'll get the name of China. He will rule from 221 to 207 BCE. Pretty much the reign of the empire is his reign, and with his death, because of being such a brutal ruler and such a harsh ruler, will come rebellion because of how hard of a ruler he was. The Great Wall will be started during this time period. It will end in about with 3,000 miles. But each dynasty will be adding more and more to that, even all the way up to the Ming Dynasty that we'll be looking at later. Innovations, this is important, the census. This allows the government to know how many people there are, where they are. That way they can better be taxed. Standardized coinage, weights, and measures. This is great for communication, great for trade and commerce as well. There's a common writing system, and that's important. This bell just keeps ringing, and it's going to be on. Sorry. The common writing system, you'll have Mandarin, which will become the language and writing system throughout the empire. It takes time to obviously get everywhere, but especially your elite, your upper class will have learned that. The Qin Dynasty is a centralized dynasty, and so they're moving into a centralized government. They saw the problems of the Zhou Dynasty and the warring states with all the feudal lords. Qin Shi Huangdi is actually going to take all of the nobles, put them in the palace, have spies look after them to make sure they're not conspiring against him. And he's going to set up regional governors, and he's going to start the bureaucracy of the governments, but the Han Dynasty is actually going to really carry that out, especially with Wu Tai and the Confucianism with the examination systems and the schools that are established. The Han Dynasty, 202 BCE to 220 CE. Important to realize the date there. You're jumping over. Okay, this is a 400-year span here. We're going from before the Common Era to the Common Era. Into Korea, Indochina, Central Asia, the Han Dynasty expands a lot, as we saw on the map previously. Contact with India, the Parthian Empire, they're going to make it to the Mediterranean, having contact with the Roman Empire. It's important to understand while they had contact all the way to the Roman Empire, nothing major was set up. They were still wanting to be isolated. Merchants traded. There wasn't any kind of major company set up or government action set up. They still wanted to stay isolated, but yet items of trade, specifically silk, is what will be traded. Wu Tai will be your most famous emperor, 140 to 87 BCE, and he is going to support Confucianism, which we'll get into in a few minutes. All right, here's the Qin Empire, and here is the Great Wall that was started during that empire. And here are some more of the parts of it, even all the way up to the 1600s. All right, political institutions, this is Wu Tai. Your political traditions, patriarchal family with your dynasties. So you're having the emperor, his next born, and so on. They'll continue as long as they have the mandate of heaven and the son of heaven and aren't replaced. That will be your patriarchal society. I mentioned earlier ancient worship, respecting those elders because you don't want to shame them, and they'll give you blessings. Semi-autonomous villages. It's such a large area, you're going to have regions of agriculture, and they are going to be self-sufficient because of the respect they have for their family members and their elders and their emperor, and so things do continue to go on, and you're not having to have a bureaucratic person from the scholar gentry there ruling over you. You'll still have local authority that will be involved with your villages. They'll still carry out the justice. They still will have to have local armies, especially along the border areas of where there's still nomads and barbarians at this time. Regional governors, as I said earlier, were set up during the Qin Dynasty. The bureaucracy is expanded during the Han Dynasty and really brought to its full extent during this classical period. One of those things Wu Tai does is set up the examination system. That's studying the 5 classics, studying Confucian philosophy, better preparing their government officials for work, instead of having that old feudal system that the Zhou had. They will set up a school system predominantly for your elites. However, there will be the opportunity for peasants, whether it be through saving a lot of money or they just happen to know the right person. They'll have the opportunity to better themselves and improve their life. So there is some opportunity for movement up the social ladder. Very difficult, but very possible. Unlike your future reading for chapter 3 with India and the caste system, where you really don't have that unless you have the afterlife and you're reborn into a new caste. That's the only way you can move up the caste system. Shi Hung Di and Wu Tai. Alright, religion and culture balance, unifying traditions. This is Confucianism. Kung Fu Si is Confucian, and it's 551 to 478 BC, so going back to the Zhou Dynasty. And mainly you're having respect for superiors, leaders must show moderation. Confucians' belief was if a leader is leading well and he's doing a good job at it, then people will follow him and they'll follow in his footsteps. And if those people are doing it, then so will the citizens. And everything will be in harmony and you will have balance. He believed in ranks based off of intelligence and merit, not your nobility, not your birthright, but how well you do with your work and your intelligence. Legalism, totally the opposite. Alternative to Confucianism, support authoritarian states, so they're ruling with a strong fist like a dictator. Belief in evil nature of humankind. All right, Confucian believed that there was something better. All right, somebody like Qin Shi Hung Di ruled with fear, ruled with an iron fist, and so legalism obviously would be more practiced by your nobles because they saw the opportunity to take advantage of ruling that way. Religion and culture. One of the things missing from the Chinese culture was the spirituality aspect. Even though some people worship Confucian as a god, he wasn't necessarily a god. He said he wasn't a god. He believed in a religion. He just never explained it or went into detail about it. And so there was always this spirituality gap. And that's going to be covered by Taoism with Lao Tzu. In the 5th century, it's going to become more religious, bringing in the force of nature, bringing in harmony with that, bringing in an ethical code. There will be some clash between Confucianism and Taoism, not nearly as much as legalism and Confucianism. This will also be the time when you'll have the 5 classics, as I mentioned earlier, something studied in the examinations. You'll have art and calligraphy, you'll have science and astronomy coming up with a yearly calendar. This is the network of Chinese philosophers. If you read the document in the chapter, this will kind of aid you in understanding the other philosophers that were mentioned in it. All right, economy and society, trade. All right, especially trade between the North and the South. You had two different, even though it was agriculture, you had two different things. You had wheat, and then you had rice, and then of course silk is going to be your international trade item. Agriculture, extremely important to the Chinese in all levels, owning the land, making sure all people are responsible for it. And so ox-drawn plow and the collar and the water-powered mills are going to help agriculture out. Everybody depended on the land. If you owned it and you had peasants working on it, either way, people depended on the land. Most people think of the Silk Road, think of this northern route right here. Right? There's also some sea routes into India, down to some ports in East Africa, up the Persian Gulf and up the Mediterranean, up the Red Sea into the Mediterranean. So there was a lot of contact with the Middle East, with parts of Africa, with the Mediterranean area. All right, how Chinese civilization fits together. Isolationism, okay? They like to stay separate. It kept them unified. It kept them together. Confucianism and bureaucracy obviously brought about political stability and economic growth, kept the mandate of heaven going, kept people focused, again, bringing in that aspect of respect in society with elders, your parents, and of course the emperor. Major divisions: Confucianism versus Taoism, Confucianism versus legalism. And of course legalism being the more of a conflict with Confucianism, especially in the nobles and that upper class wanting to use more of the legalistic view to gain more control in the government and over the people. And that summarizes chapter 2.